Welcome to Collecting Chaos. It's the Monday morning show. Not everyone seems to understand what I'm trying to do here, so I'm going to give a little background, a little bit of history, and talk about role-playing a little bit. What is role-playing? Well, in 1638, Lord James Dunn of Coniston brought to life the first known reenactment, a staged battle in London involving dozens of costume performers, roundheads. And they covered a series of victories that were during the Civil War, acting out the scenes of the Civil War at that time. And that's one of the earliest reenactments that we've seen, or that we have records of. Of course, reenactments were not a new thing back then either, because the Romans would reenact certain battles in their colosseums for the amusement of their guests. There's another group. So we have, let me go back a little bit. There are a lot of reenactments going on. There are reenactments of the Civil War, the American Civil War. There are reenactments of the Revolution. There's reenactments of 1812. There's reenactments of all kinds of different periods of history. And then we have another group called the Society for Creative Anachronisms. And it's an international history group. And their idea is studying and recreating medieval European cultures, or at least the way they think they should have been during the medieval or Dark Ages. And that's basically, they concentrate on pre-17th century. They're selective about what they do in their cultures and stuff like that. And as of 2017, they had about 60,000 total participants, half of which were paid members. And that group was founded in 1966. Are they role players? Yeah, loosely. I would loosely classify them as role players. Yeah, they're trying to do kind of like historical reenactments, but it's still role-playing. It's a reenactment of everyday life, so it's still a type of role-playing. Just as the reenactors for Civil War battles or other battles are role-playing those battles to a certain extent. They might not get quite as deep into it as the live-action role-playing that came about in the late 1970s. And that was basically people playing their characters. You know, okay, this guy is a mage, and there's a goblin that poked his head out from a tree, and he's going to throw a fireball at him. So, yeah, that's a little bit more in-depth. That is literal role-playing. That's live-action role-playing, and that's fantasy role-play. And that's a little bit different from the creative anachronisms, which is a historical role-play, or the reenactment groups, which are historical role play. Now, if you've never been to a Renaissance fair, very highly recommend you go to one. It's just, yeah, just go to one. You'll enjoy it, I'm sure. And that's, to me, that's basically live-action role-playing. Of course, the earliest live-action role-playing that anybody does is they go out and play war as a child, or they go out and play Cowboys and Indians as a child, or maybe they're playing, putting a cape around their neck and pretending to be Superman or something, or Spider-Man. That is role-playing also. That is the earliest form of live-action role-play that anybody ever does. So all of that's role-playing. Now we've got that out of the way. Then, of course, there's video role-playing. The role-playing games, EverQuest, World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy XIV, Even Legends of Link, to a certain extent, would have been considered a role-playing game, and of course, when you have interaction, as you have like in World of Warcraft or in Final Fantasy, that's a massive multi-user online role-playing game. So that's even bigger. So those are two of the three types of role-playing games that I'm talking about. Then we have the one that I'm concerned with here, now, and during this video series. In 1974, Tactical Studies Rules published a game called Dungeons and Dragons. It was written and designed by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. Although Dave Arneson's name seems to have fallen by the wayside for some reason, I don't understand why. Some of his rules were much better than the ones that Gary Gygax produced. That's where it starts. That's where tabletop role-playing starts. And all of that brings me to what I'm doing here, what I'm trying to do here. From 1976 to 2001, I spent a lot of time as a dungeon master. That's to say, I was referee of an ongoing Dungeons and Dragons games. Not just one, but multiple. And I'd occasionally sit in a player, not just Dungeons and Dragons, though. I played a lot of different games, including Traveler and Conan and Boots and Saddles and what was this? Mercenary Spies and Private Eyes. We did Call of Cthulhu and a whole bunch of other games. But with 26 years of experience, I feel reasonably qualified to share some of the methods that I would use to design and run some of my campaigns and adventures. Mind you, I read everything I could lay my hands on. I read the Judges Guild stuff. I still have a lot of that stuff. I read all of the Dungeons and Dragons books. I read the modules. But in all the time that I played, I never actually ran a module. I played in a few, but I never actually ran one. I would take ideas from them and incorporate them into my own homebrew stuff. And, I started playing using the original pamphlets from 1974. Men and Magic, Monsters and Treasures, and Gods, Demigods, and Heroes. And then later on, I added in the Greyhawk stuff. And then Dave Arneson came out with Blackmore, and I really liked the combat system in Blackmore, but nobody else liked it because you could literally lose an arm or a leg or whatever. So, yeah, and I played Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. I played the boxed sets of Dungeons and Dragons, all the way from the basic all the way up to the God level ones. And I played the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2, and I dabbled in the D20 system that was the Coast published as their remake of Dungeons & Dragons after it was sold to them. So, yeah, I kind of feel a little bit qualified to do this. So, why did I stop back in 2001? Well, when I moved to Texas 21 years ago, didn't have any players. There's nobody around that I knew that played the game, and I haven't really looked for any. So that's why I'm not currently running a D&D game or a campaign. Now, my hope in this series is that by the time I'm finished with it, if I ever finish with it, people will understand the basic concepts that I used when I created my wilderness, my underworld, and my city adventures. And that they're able to use some of those concepts to make their own game better. So, what is a tabletop role-playing game? That's the question that should be on everybody's mind. Why am I part of this? What is it that I'm talking about? Tabletop role-playing games are rules, sets of rules, which players and a game master, referee, or dungeon master, and I'm going to use the term DM from here out, but they use those rules to weave a story of adventure, with the players being a critical part of that adventure. The DM puts them in a situation, and the players either describe the reaction of their character or actually might give the reaction. An example would be a rogue might try to pick a lock, or a fighter might attack. A cleric might take the time to heal a stranger's infectious wound. Or a mage might just say the hell with this and throw a fireball. And they might use miniatures to represent their characters, and generally these are about 1 inch. I'll show some examples of them later on. Or they might actually use toys. I remember a game, I think it was in Tunnels and Trolls, where I used a 3 3/4 inch Star Wars toy to represent a giant that the players were supposed to fight. Now, after an probably overlong discussion of Star Wars, it's easy to get sidetracked by stuff like that. They decided that they would hide, and when they got a chance, they'd run away, and that's what they did. Because you got to remember, the average human-sized miniature is about 1 inch. And this was a 3 3/4 inch figure, so it's about 4 times bigger than them. And yeah, that's how big it was, and it was like 40 hit dice or something like that. Yeah, don't want to take those on. Tunnels and Trolls is a whole different gaming system, whole different sets of rules, whole different meaning to the term hit dice. We won't go into that right now. If somebody wants to later on, I might do a segment on Tunnels and Trolls. Now, last week I created a few NPCs, or non-player characters, and to flesh out what is needed to do a campaign, I'd probably have to do a half a dozen, maybe a dozen characters, and this would include various vendors and constables, political figures. They might be town bosses, or they might even be a king, a magistrate, a king, whatever. I'm not going to create all of those, and I don't think you should either. If you're starting your campaign from the beginning, 1 or 2 NPCs is plenty, just enough to get them started, or to have some place that they can take to sell stuff. Now, let's say your characters were out on an adventure and they managed to get a bunch of herbs that they want to sell. So they go and they ask the smithy, who they know because they bought some stuff from him and sold him some iron before, or some metal before. They ask him where they can sell these, or if there's anybody around, and he goes, "Oh yeah, old Sarah down the street in the shack. She buys that sort of stuff." Well, right then, you just determined that you have a new NPC named Sarah, and she lives in a shack, and she's out front tending her flowers and her herbs, and your players go up to her. You don't have any information on her, other than she's old, she lives in a shack, and she buys herbs, and she raises herbs. And, of course, she's going to try to get them for as cheap as she can from the player characters. So you're not going to stop and roll the character right then. All you need to do is write down the name, name, quick description of whatever they say, an older character, white hair, hunched over, whatever, cackles a little bit once in a while, maybe something like that. And just write down stuff like that so that you can give a quick way to playing. Then, after the game is over, you go back and flesh out that character. So if they ever need to go to her again, there'll be some continuity. But you don't try to do all that stuff on the spot. You just say, all they know is the name, that she's older, and that she'll buy this stuff. So there's some things we have to understand before we can continue on. And I have some notes I have written on a page here, but I have to turn a page because I'm done with that page, and I forgot to turn it while I took a break from the camera. And what you need to understand about monsters and characters and how I viewed the game is, number one, hit dice. Now, hit dice are generally, where is it? An 8-sided die. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 8 sides on that die. That's basically a hit die. Got a 4. It's a half hit die monster. Now, what these are for is to determine how many points of damage a monster can take. Now, notice when I said 4, it's a half hit die monster. Okay, that's because 4 happens to be exactly 1/2 of 8. There are times when you will have half hit die or quarter hit die monsters, in which case you roll it and you do it. That would be like a 1, because 1 is always a 1 no matter what. Yeah, so it's how many points of damage the monster can take, or a character can take, before they either become dead or unconscious. And dead or unconscious is up to the dungeon master, or up to the DM as to which they are. And it's based on the story content. Monsters, to let you know what a monster is everything that's not a player character or a non-player character. They're classified by the number of hit dice they have. So a 1-hit die monster would be a first level and generally found in low-level dungeons or low-level adventures. The more hit dice a monster has, the more powerful they are. So a 1-hit die monster is about half as powerful as a 2-hit die monster. And a 3-hit die monster is about twice as powerful as a 2-hit die monster. 4-hit die monster, twice as powerful as a 3-hit die monster. You see, that's the way I always did it. And it worked out well for me. So, characters, on the other hand, they're based on levels. Which is why I give 8 hit points to all of my starting characters. Because a starting character is a 0 level. But they're still 1 hit die. But rather than making the player roll like a 4-sided die or a 6-sided die or an 8-sided or whatever they are for their class, I just give them 8 hit points. This is 8 hit points they get. This is a freebie. They don't get any constitution bonus. They don't get a species bonus. They don't get a penalty for their constitution. They don't get a penalty for their species. They get 8 hit points to start out with. Because they're a 0 level. That means they're newly created. They have no experience. They're just getting started. But why do I give them 8 hit points? Because they're the cream of the crop. They're the best of the best. That's why they decided to go adventuring. Now, once they get to first level, and I always set first level at 100 experience points. I'm going to have to get out one of the books a little bit later so I can actually tell you what the experience points are for the different levels. But I'd use 100 experience points and they go from 0 level to first level. And the reason I did that was that's when they get their first hit die. That's when they get their first... A mage would get a 4-sided die. So if you were a mage, you get 1d4. You get a plus or minus for your constitution, plus or minus for species. And I say species instead of race because race has nothing to do with species. A dwarf is not a race, a dwarf is a species. An elf is not a race, an elf is a species. Human is a species. Half-orc is a species. Orc is a species. Goblin is a species. Dragon is a species. That's why I say species rather than race. So, mage gets 4. Cleric gets 6. I believe a rogue gets 8. I might be mistaken on that. Fighter gets 10. And if you happen to be in a campaign that uses barbarian, I believe they start with 12. They get a 12-sided die. Modified for constitution or species, either up or down. So yes, it is possible to roll a 1 for your mage, but he has a minus to his constitution, so he gets, does he get 0 points for going up a level? Yes, that's correct. He would get no points for going up a level because he rolled a 1. Some people disagree with this. Some people say, no, he always gets at least 1 point. I didn't do it that way. That's just the way I did it. It's vital that the DM understand the relationship between it and difference between player level monster hit dice and adventure level. Adventure level is a whole different thing. An adventure level can have monsters from level 1 to, let's say adventure level 1. You can have up to 3 hit die monsters. You go, yeah, but what? You just said that those like 4, that's like 4 times more powerful than a 1 hit die monster. That means a player character wouldn't have a chance. Player characters don't generally run around by themselves. They usually have other player characters. So you have a 0 level player who has 8 hit points. Is he going to run into that level 3 monster by himself? No. He's going to have like 3 or 4 others with him. Maybe 4, maybe 5. So 4 or 5 characters should be able to handle a 3 hit die monster. It'll be tough. It's not going to be easy for them, but they should be able to do it. And that's my idea, is a 0 level player character should be able to handle a monster of 1 hit die or less. 0 level being they have 1 hit die because this is a hit die. No, they don't get any bonuses to it. They just get the straight 8 hit points. But a 0 level player is a 1 hit die monster. And they should be able to take on another 1 hit die monster with a reasonable chance of success. And 2 players should have no trouble handling a 1 hit die monster. Or even several 1 hit die monsters. 3 players, yeah, they can probably handle a 2 hit die monster without too much trouble. And 4 or 5 should be able to take on a 3 hit die monster and have a decent fighting chance of beating it. Depending, of course, on how the dice gods are feeling that day. The dice gods are those that control the outcome of your rolls. So when you roll that 20-sided die to see if you hit, and you get a 6, the dice gods were not kind. So that's why it's important. You got to be able to have it go one way or the other, know where your campaign or your adventure is going to go based on how many monsters show up at any given time. So what I'm saying is you want the encounters that your PCs have to be challenging, but still give them a chance to win. There are occasions when it's desirable to just wipe them out, obliterate them. Don't give them a chance. You have overwhelming force. But this should be used only to advance the story. So let's say, as an example, your characters have been approached by the captain of the guard and a contingent of guards. There's like 6 or 7 of them. They're obviously higher level than you. You're only 0 level. It's a starting adventure, remember? But you panic and decide to fight. They just beat the crap out of you. Beat you senseless and throw you in prison until the magistrate comes to see you. And that's all they wanted to do, was the guards wanted to take you to see the magistrate, because that's what they were contracted to do. They were said, go summon these people, bring them before me. So they finally get to see the magistrate, and the magistrate has an offer of an employment for them. Hey, I need you to go do this. There's a wolf that's killing all these sheep, and we want the wolf taken out, and think you're the group to do it. Yeah. Sometimes it's best to just beat them senseless and let the story advance. Or they could have just surrendered. They could have just gone, oh, magistrate wants to see us? Okay, we'll go. Let's go. But the lesson for the day is, don't overwhelm your players. Always give them an out. Make it possible for them to win, unless it's above the scenario I gave a little while ago, and they might go peacefully. The outcome would be the same regardless. Resistance is futile, but with less lumps. Or maybe they've been overwhelmed by goblins and taken prisoner. But the mage finally makes his fire finger work and burns through the ropes. The group manages to escape, but not before decreasing the population of the goblin community slightly and recovering their most essential equipment. Yeah, all those herbs they gathered that they were going to sell to Sarah, they're gone. But you've got your sword and shield still, and your knives and your cantrip stuff, and yeah. Or you could have, they might have been captured by the swamp orcs. They're going to be taken before the boss. Yeah. Why? Well, it seems the cleric decided that it was more important for her to help the young orc's broken arm and maybe heal it a little bit and set it, while others battled a swamp dragon. And the boss just wants to meet this group of adventurers and this young human who took care of his son. Now, that's from an adventure that I planned and never got a chance to run, but it was going to be a good one. Swamp dragons, by the way, are basically alligators or crocodiles. So, and that's what I had to talk about today, was what role-playing is, what tabletop role-playing is, and give you a little insight on the basics of levels versus hit dice versus adventure levels. And we'll get into more of that as time goes on. Yeah, I don't know what we're going to do next week, but you can bet we're going to do something. In the meantime, hope you enjoyed this. Hope it was enlightening for you, for some of you that aren't quite sure what's going on. And make sure, before you handle your dice, your comics, your cards, your toys, whatever you happen to be into, you wash your hands. It's good for your collectibles. Most of all, it's good for your health. Having said all of that, I want to wish every single one of you to have the best day possible. And we will see you, if you decide to watch it, on tomorrow's video, which will be Tuesday's Treasures, and I have some real treasures to show you too. So, yeah, we'll see you then. Bye.